This is not going to go the way you think. Come on. By everything you've got.
Yes, we are in the middle of a series called Battles, and I just want to break the news to you. This is my superpower. I'm the super dad. And my daughters aren't here to argue with me right now, but evidently they had this mug specially made. Target carries it, but it's only one mug in the world, and I am the super dad. That's my superpower. So we are glad that you're here. We are in the middle of a series called Battles, and we're glad that you're here, whether you're watching online with us or you're live. It's my privilege to continue our series here. In the last couple of weeks, Pastor Chris has shared on talking about the battles, and if you hadn't heard those messages, I would encourage you to go back. The first week, he talked about how our active faith activates God's power in our lives. And then last week, he talked about how you position yourself to experience God's power when you follow his plan. And so today, I have the chance to continue talking about the battles. Now, before we do that, this is going to be a little part I want you to answer questions back, okay? And don't worry about that. That's no big deal. I just want you to answer the first thing that comes to your mind, because we all have favorites, okay? And I'm not going to ask you which is your favorite kid if your kid's sitting next to you. I'm not going to say that, okay? But we all have favorites. So just real quick, just say, what's your favorite place to eat? Just say it. There's like 6 of y'all that said something there, okay? So we're going to ask that again. Maybe you're not quite awake yet, okay? I'm going to ask you again, what's your favorite place to eat? Everybody. Good. What's your favorite TV show? Are we going to have to do this twice every time because y'all can't think that fast? Okay, favorite movie. Okay, favorite type of food. Okay. Favorite pastor. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I was trying to sneak that in there. What's your favorite thing to do when you have some time off? Sleep. That was some moms there saying sleep, okay? We all have favorites of different things that we like to do, things that we like to eat, and all have favorites. But one of the things we're going to talk about today is one of the stories in the Bible that happens to be one of my favorite stories. And it's David and Goliath. And in fact, it may be one of your favorites as well. And if it's not one of your favorites, I can promise you in some form or fashion, whether you've heard the biblical element to it, you've heard us talk or heard people talk about the story of David and Goliath, because it's about a smaller person taking on a bigger person, or a smaller team taking on a larger team. And we're going to dive into that today, okay? But here's the deal. I don't want you to get lost in the battle part that we think about as David and Goliath. Because there was an army on both sides, okay? There was a battle going on there. And then David and Goliath eventually end up fighting, okay? And just to let you know, it hypes up a whole lot, and it's kind of a bummer at the end, okay? It's just kind of like, oh, that's all there was, okay? But here's the deal. The battle actually takes place all the way through the story. And I want you to hear that with me today, okay? That the battle goes all the way through the story. So I want you to think, who are you fighting? Who is your enemy? What is the battle in your life today? And as you think about that, let's just pray real quick, okay? God, you are such a good God. And Father, today as we celebrate fathers, we just want to say thank you for being the perfect father. We thank you that you are, even when our earthly fathers aren't able to be there for us, Father, you are always there. And Father, I ask that you would speak to us this morning, that you would challenge us and encourage us, not just as fathers, but as people, that we would move forward in the life that you've called us to live. It's in your Son's precious name I pray. Amen. If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Samuel. We're going to read a lot, okay? We're going to read all the story in 1 Samuel 17. It'll be on the screen, but I'd encourage you to look at your notes as well as we go through that, okay? But in 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 1, it says, "The Philistines now mustered their army for battle." Now, does that seem weird to you? Because when I read that, I'm like, what do they do? Put mustard Okay, another dad joke, sorry. Okay, I'll leave those to Chris. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Sokah in Judah and Azekah in Ephes Damim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Okay, so picture this. This is how the fight was going on. The two armies gathered on these tops of these hills, and there was a valley in between. All right? There was a valley in between. And so that's where the fighting would take place, is in the valley. So the two armies are on either side. And this is what I want you to understand is this. As we look at this, the battle is real. The battle is real. Whether you like it or not, okay, whether you choose to believe it or not, you are in a battle. Now, you may see this battle as physical, okay? As a physical battle, you may be dealing with some illness or some pain and aches and pains as you get older. You know, it's just kind of one of those things. Maybe you've had an injury before, but you're dealing with some physical pain, and so maybe you think that's your battle. Maybe you think the battle is as financial. Maybe you're struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month, or maybe you're making ends meet, but you just seem like you can't get ahead, and it's maybe you lost a job, maybe you were laid off, maybe you made some bad financial decisions and you're dealing with those consequences. But maybe your battle is relational. Maybe the battle that you're dealing with right now is relational, and maybe your marriage at home is just you're constantly in conflict, and it just seems like, man, we just can't get along. Or maybe you have a kid that's living at home and it just seems like you're just, man, we just argue all the time. Or maybe you have a parent that lives at your house with you and you're arguing with them all the time. It could be a coworker. It could be your boss. It could be your ex. It could be your spouse's ex. But it just seems like from a relational standpoint, it's just constant tension, constant friction. Or maybe your battle is emotional. Maybe you're dealing with grief. Maybe you're dealing with depression. Maybe you're dealing with anxiety. And on the outside, people don't have a clue that you're fighting that battle. They don't have a clue. But it's affecting everything else in your life. And what tends to happen is we tend to focus on those things instead of what the real battle is. What is the real battle? Here's the deal. Satan wants you to see your life in one or two ways. He wants you to think that the battle's not actually going on, or he wants you to focus on a different enemy than the actual enemy in your life. And if he could manage to do that, to get us think that there's really not a battle going on, or the battle is something besides what it actually is, then he wins. Listen to what Peter said. I'm going to read this here and just say, Peter, by the way, if y'all know who Peter was one of Jesus' disciples. Okay, he followed Jesus for 3 years of his ministry. If you know anything about Peter's the one that when Jesus was arrested, took out his sword and chopped off the ear. Okay, if y'all remember that. All right, he was all gung-ho and he was going to fight. And then when Jesus got arrested, he denied Jesus 3 times and kind of went away and hid. But then after he saw Jesus' resurrected body, he became one of the leaders of the church and eventually ended up giving his life for Jesus, okay? And he wrote this letter, and this is what he says in 1 Peter 5:8. He says, stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. So who is the enemy according to Peter? The devil, Satan, okay? Satan is the enemy. And what happens a lot of times is we get focused on a different battle than who the actual enemy is. The devil wants to destroy your life. He wants to destroy your marriage. He wants to destroy your kids. He wants to destroy your grandkids. He wants to steal your peace, and he wants to steal your joy. But what happens is we tend to focus on other things instead of the actual enemy. There's time and time again, I meet with couples and going through some marital struggles and stuff like that. And they'll come in and right off the bat, we'll pray and I'll say, okay, so tell me what's going on. And they'll either look at each other or look at me. And then they start going, he said he did this, he did that. And then it's like, oh my gosh, okay, slow down here, okay? And then I'll spend the rest of our time together at the first meeting we have, helping them understand that they're not the enemy, that your spouse is not your enemy. Your wife is not your enemy. The person that's trying to destroy that marriage is who Peter talks about right here. It's Satan. It's Satan. And he understands that if he could get our focus onto a different battle and onto a different enemy, he wins. If we can just get distracted. Now, here's the deal with David and Goliath, this battle. You got the Israelites on one side, the Philistines on one side. They understand that there is a physical battle going on. Our battles most of the time are not physical like that. If we could see them, we would understand, okay, this is really going on. But it's not always physical. But the truth is, you are in a battle. And you are, listen to me guys, you are a warrior. And I'm not talking just to dads today. This is everybody message. You are a warrior. The question is, what kind of warrior are you going to be? Because not all warriors are created equal. Not all warriors are created equal. And there's something that distinguishes between a warrior. When you look at the story, there's certain things that distinguish between one warrior and the next warrior. And the first thing is this, what you see. What you see. Our perception of the battle, our perception of Goliath, our perception of the enemy determines what kind of warrior we are. So put yourself on this hillside, okay? Put yourself on the hillside. You're up here and you're looking down into this valley, okay? You're looking down into this valley and then we pick up right here as Goliath walks out. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet. Oh, and he was over 9 feet tall, okay? This is me, okay? I'm thinking I'm there, okay? And his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds, and he was 9 feet tall. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he was 9 feet tall, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. He was 9 feet tall. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. And oh, by the way, he was 9 feet tall, okay? So you're up there on the top and you're looking down at Goliath and all you can think about is this massive beast of a man. How would you look at Goliath? How would you look at him? That determines what kind of warrior you are. When you look at the story, when Saul looked down, King Saul, when he looked down, he saw someone that was over 9 feet tall, and he was scared. When the other soldiers, the Israelite army looked down and saw him, they had fear. But when David saw Goliath, it was different. It was different. David saw the same giant. He heard Goliath say the same thing. But it was different. So it's how you see Goliath, but then it's also how do you hear him? What do you hear when you hear Goliath? What do you hear? Look at 1 Samuel 17, 8 through 11. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. Now, let me just kind of tell you that it's up there, but a taunt is a biblical smack talk. Goliath was biblically smack talking the Israelites. He was taunting them. And then he goes, why are you all coming out to fight? He called. I'm the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Okay? The thing I want you to see is what does Goliath tell them? They say, you are the servants of Saul. You are the servant of Saul. And the army started listening to Goliath, listening to what he was saying about the army. Now, here's a very big part right here. Not only did they hear Goliath say it, but they began to believe it. They began to believe it. They began to hear that they were servants of Saul and not servants of God. What they were listening to was making Goliath more of a mighty warrior to them. They were letting Goliath dictate their fear. They were letting Goliath dictate how they saw themselves. how they saw themselves. And then steps David, okay? David steps on the scene. Now, I don't know what kind of perspective you have of David, okay? You may have David thinking that David's this mighty warrior and he comes out and he's a kid, man, okay? Now, he's not a kid playing video games and drinking orange soda. That's not what but he's a kid. He's outside a lot. He's watching sheep. He's out living in outdoors, so he's an outdoors kind of person. But he's not a warrior. He's not a trained warrior. He's not Goliath. He's not a size of Goliath. In fact, he's too young to even be part of the army. And David steps onto the scene, okay? He steps onto the scene in 1 Samuel 17:20. So David left the sheep. Jesse, his dad, had said, hey, you need to go and take these things to your brothers. And he goes. He left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelites' armies were leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelites and Philistines' forces stood facing each other, army against army, on the hills. And David left his things with the keeper of the supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. Okay, so David's there now. The armies are looking down, and Goliath comes out and does his same thing. You got to understand, he's been doing this for 40 days, twice a day. So 80 times the army has seen Goliath come down there, make fun of them, call them out, challenge them. And David finally gets there, and he sees this over 9 foot tall giant. And he listens to them say, you are only servants of Saul. But David's response was different than Saul's response and the other army, the rest of the army. It was very different. Even though he heard the same thing and he saw the same thing, his perception was different. His perception was different. We pick up in verse 24. As soon as the Israelites' army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempt from paying taxes. David asked the soldier standing nearby, what will a man get for killing the Philistine and ending the defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? This is so fun. David's like, what do you get? What happens? What happens to the person that kills this Philistine? And then he said, you get a wife. He's like, no, I'm not sure about that one. But you get no taxes for your whole family. Now, I'm not sure if that may be a little incentive around our time. I'm happy with my wife. I'm very content with her. I'll keep that one. But man, if you tell me you're going to take away some taxes, I may go fight a Goliath with a sling, okay? And that's what's going on right here, okay? So this is kind of a sidebar. Let me just throw this in here for you. Saul was the king. When he was chosen as king, they said it was head and shoulders above all the other people. He was a mighty warrior himself. So Saul's responsibility as a king should have been the one in the valley taking on the giant. But he wasn't. In fact, he made a reward for anybody that would go out there and do it. So Saul didn't step up for the battle. And not only did he not step up for the battle, but he's the king. He could say, okay, you go fight him. But he started asking for volunteers. He was completely out of his range of what he was as a king. And then David is on the scene. We pick up in verse 27. And these men gave David the same reply, okay? David's asking the question, what do you get? They said, yes, that is a reward for killing him. But when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. And then David responds, what have I done? David replied, I was only asking a question. Come on, man. I was only asking a question. Remember when I talked about the battle is all the way through The battle is what they saw, but the battle is what they were hearing. They heard Goliath say that you're only servants of Saul. David heard the exact same thing. But David also heard his brother, his family, his close relative say, what are you doing here? You're just a shepherd. You're just a shepherd. Leave the fighting up to us trained warriors that, by the way, have been listening to this for 40 days and have not stepped up to fight. You go home, little brother, and you take care of the sheep. Do you see the battle that's going on? It's not in the valley. The battle is not between David and Goliath. The battle is not between the Philistines and the Israelites. The battle is for what they're listening to. The battle is them listening to, you're just a servant. You're just a servant of Saul. And David, you're just a shepherd. You're just a shepherd. Now, let me just ask you guys to do me a favor here. Make sure that the people that you surround yourself with aren't the people that are just going to get in your ear and say, you're just a shepherd. And we don't need people that are just going to say, hey, you're just a shepherd. You need people in your life that are going to encourage you to step up and fight the Goliaths, to step up and fight the battles and not listen to the other things that are being communicated to you. We hear enough of that as it is. Don't lose sight of the enemy. Now, real quick, how many in here are babies in the family? You know, you're like the youngest, okay? I'm the youngest, go figure, all right? I'm the baby of our family. And you can see the birth order here going on. All right? You got the older brother and you got the baby brother. And I know that whenever I used to go on vacation with my brother and sister, and they may be watching right now, I'm not sure, but here's the deal. We go on vacation, they would beg me to stop talking. I had to be the most irritating little brother, well, only they've ever had, you know, but then again, probably was the most irritating little brother. But I would imagine David was kind of a lot like that because he was just a curious little brother. And they'd had enough here. And he was kind of like just, and David's like, I'm just asking a question. I'm just asking a question. And his brother's saying, go home. Go home. Go home. In verse 30, David walked away and went to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Okay? He walked away from his brother and went to another group and said, is it true that I'll get a wife and I don't get taxes? I don't get taxed anymore, neither is my dad. And then in verse 31, then David's question was reported to King Saul, and King sent for him. He heard that there was somebody in the ranks asking, what do you get for this? What do you get? Are you sure you get this? You get this? So Saul heard this and he sent for David. And when David came to King Saul, look at this. This is so cool. In verse 32, it says, David says this, don't worry about the Philistine. I'll go fight him. Isn't that cool? Here's a little kid. He's not scrawny looking. He's an outdoors guy, but he's not a mighty warrior. He doesn't have all the stuff on. He says, I'll go fight him. I'll go fight him. I love that response. He said, dude, I'm up. I ain't scared of this dude. I ain't scared of him. And then Saul started talking. Okay? The voices that David heard, you're just a servant of Saul. And then his brother said, you are just a shepherd. And listen what Saul said to him. Don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. Look at this. You are only a boy. And he's been a man of war since his youth. Do you see the battle? Do you see the battle? Do you see the voices that David was dealing with and how he was listening to and what he was listening to? It wasn't that he was just a servant of Saul, but his brother also said, you're just a shepherd. And then King Saul says, and you're just a boy. You're just a boy. We hear the voices all the time, don't we? We hear the voices all the time. You can't be a great dad. You've made too many mistakes. You can't be a great wife. How could you be a great wife in what you do? You can't be a great, and fill in the blank. I remember my senior year, that was a long time ago, my daughter's senior year, when she graduated from high school, her entire senior year, I heard the voices. You haven't gotten her ready. She's not prepared for the world. You haven't been a good dad. All year long, I listened to that from Satan. What voices are you listening to? What voices are you listening to? You are just a servant of Saul. You're just a shepherd. You're just a boy. Now, this is where the separation happens. This is where the two warriors separate right here. This is where the two things separate. Because here's the deal. Saul and David's brothers and all the other soldiers, when they looked at Goliath, they compared Goliath to themselves. And next to themselves, he was over 9 feet tall. But when David looked at Goliath, you know who he compared him to? God. He compared him to God. Not himself. Not himself at all. He saw Goliath as no comparison to his God. Even when Goliath said, you're just a servant. You're just a servant of Saul. And his brother said, you're just a shepherd. And King Saul said, you're just a boy. He listened to God say, you're a warrior. And some of you in here need to hear that today. That you aren't just what the enemy says you are. You are a warrior in God's army. And then David, after Saul tells him that you're just a boy, David says this. I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue that lamb from its mouth. That's cool. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw. A lion or a bear. Catch it by the jaw, man. And I club it to death. I have done this both to lions and bears, plural. And I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. And David's busting out with some God-sized swag right here, man. He has some confidence. He has confidence in what he is doing right here. The Israelite army and King Saul were living in fear, but David was living in faith. David had faith, and you know why he had faith? Is because God had come through for him. God had come through for him. God had come through because God had been there for him when he had to deal with the lion and the bears. God had come through. He wasn't focused on Goliath. He was focused on God. He wasn't focused on the size of Goliath. He was remembering the Goliaths he had fought in the past. Now, and God is delivering from here. Let me challenge you here, guys. Sometimes when that battle is standing in front of us and that enemy is in front of us, we don't remember the past victories that God's given us. We don't remember the lions and the bears. We only focus on the Goliath in front of us. And we need to remember what God has brought us through. God does not bring you to a point to let you down right now, but he prepares you for the battle ahead. And that's what he did with David. He did that with him. David understood that the time that he spent as a shepherd in the wilderness watching sheep, God was preparing him for this very moment. In verse 37, Saul finally consented. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul gave David his armor, a bronze helmet, and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. I love that part because what happens a lot of times in our life, we try to use the world's remedy for the battles that we have, and what we need to do is we need to rely on God. We think about what the world says, how we can fix our problems, and what we need to do is stop looking at the world. We need to look at God and say, okay, I'm ready to do it your way. In verse 40, David picked up 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them in his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with a shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with the shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog, he roared at David, that you come at me with a stick? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here and I'll give you the flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled. Now, I love this. This is getting good. Okay, guys, here's the deal. When you're out and you're standing next to someone, their bigness gets bigger. All right? Whenever I was in college, I lived in the athletic dorm. I ran track and cross country. Yes, I did. Okay? And we would be in an elevator, and I'd be in an elevator, and I'd be standing next to a lineman or something or a basketball center, and I'm like, holy schmoly. You know, when they're out on the field, they look big, but man, when you're standing right next to them, they're like mammoth huge. This is what David's going through right here. He's on the same level with Goliath. Yeah, he was up here. He's like, I can beat that. Look at that. He's tiny. But now he's face to face, and he understands that Goliath is huge. And Goliath's voice is getting louder and louder as he comes towards him. And David's like, cool, got this. I got this. Verse 45. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's army, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescued his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. David did something right here. His confidence was not in beating the bear and the lion. He didn't say, I can beat you, Goliath, because I've done it to a lion, I've done it to the bear. He said, I can beat Goliath because God beat the lion and the bear. God stood in the gap. God is the one that our confidence needs to be in. On that day, he let Goliath know that we're not servants of Saul. We're servants of the one true king. And today, everybody's going to know it. And I can't help but think that they're down here. There's 3 of them in the valley, and the armies are on either side. And David is saying this loud enough so the Philistine army can hear, and he's saying it loud enough so the Israelite army can hear that today God's going to deliver us. And I love verse 48. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Goliath is walking towards David, and David takes off running towards Goliath. Whew, man, is that a servant of Saul? Is that a shepherd boy? No, that's a warrior. And he takes off running. In verse 49, reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled the stone. He hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. Remember when I was telling you it was kind of, a lot of build up? No, Goliath, boom, just down. One stone, bang, down. Isn't that awesome? This big old hyped up thing is down, okay? So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from his sheath, and David used it to kill him and cut off his head. Man, here's the deal, guys. The shepherd boy became a warrior. The shepherd boy became a warrior. What kind of warrior are you? Let me give you 3 things I want you to think about real quick. First off, the battle is real. Okay? The battle is real. Satan is trying to keep you from having faith in God. You may not even know if you believe in God. And Satan is going to do everything he can to keep you from trusting in Jesus. So maybe the battle is for your faith right now. The second thing is this. I want you to understand this part right here. Parents, I want you to know this, guys. I'm the emotional pastor, by the way, if you don't already know that. Satan wants to destroy your family. Satan wants to ruin your marriage. And Satan wants to steal your kids. And Satan wants to steal your grandkids. And if you don't think you're in a battle, you're missing it. Because day and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Satan is coming at your kids, and he's coming at you. He's coming at your marriage. And if you think he's not, he's got you right where he wants you. The battle is real. I'm telling you, the battle is real. How do you see your Goliath? How do you see your Goliath? Is your Goliath bigger than God? Or is your Goliath so small that you don't need God? There's a difference here, isn't there? Sometimes we have such pride that we think we can handle it. We got this, God. When I need you, I'll call you in. No, you need God all the time. Okay? You need God all the time. Last thing, stop listening to the wrong voices. Stop listening to the wrong voices. Listen to what it says in John 8:44. He has always hated the truth. It's talking about Satan. He has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So when you hear the voice say, you're not a good father, you're not a good mom, you're not a good friend, you're not a good boss, you're not a good employee, when you hear those voices, remember that Satan is a liar. And what you need to understand right now is we have a God that loves us, and when he sees you as a masterpiece, he sees you as perfect, and he sees you as the warrior that he's called you to be. And when you give your life to him, he gives you a new identity. And he gives you the identity to stand up against any Goliath in your life. Guys, ladies, we need to be that warrior that God's called us to be. We need to stand up against the Goliaths in our life. And we need to understand who the enemy is. It's not each other. It's not your spouse. It's not your boss. It's not a political party. Listen to me. The enemy is Satan. And it's time for us to fight for our kids, to fight for our marriage, and to fight the Goliaths so that we can be the warrior that he's called us to be. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your truth. Man, thank you for the story. Thank you for David and his willingness not to listen to the voices around him, but to listen to you say that he is a mighty warrior. Father, will you help us to understand that you are preparing us every day to be that mighty warrior? Lord, help us to understand that being that warrior only comes through a relationship with you. God, we love you. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.